Welcome. In this video, we're going to be learning about King Omri and also about the Mesha Stela, which is one of the most important archaeological discoveries for the Bible. The Stela is from Israel's neighbor Moab, and it contains our earliest extra-biblical reference to an Israelite king by name, which is King Omri. And not only that, but it also contains our earliest and most certain extra-biblical reference to the very name of Israel's God, Yahweh. So it's a truly remarkable archaeological artifact, which we're going to be learning about. But before we do so, we must first learn about King Omri, so we have some context for the Stela. So Omri is a king from the northern kingdom of Israel, and probably the most important thing about Omri is he starts our very first dynasty in Israel. So what do I mean by dynasty? Well, for the first 50 years of Israel's existence, there's no clear line of royal descent. Kings are constantly being killed and replaced by others. Refer to my previous video to learn more about that bloodshed. But with Omri, his son is king after him, and his grandsons are also kings. So we actually have a clear royal descent for 40 years. Thus, the house of Omri ruled over Israel from 880 to 840. As noted in this textbook quote, Omri is a powerful Israelite king who established the first dynasty in the northern kingdom. He continues, Omri is the first Israelite king mentioned in extra-biblical sources. His name appears in the inscription of King Mesha of Moab, and Assyrian sources refer to Israel as, quote, the land of the house of Omri, end quote. So as you can see, Omri is a really significant historical figure. So who were the children and grandchildren of Omri? Well, Omri had a son called Ahab, and Ahab married Jezebel, and they had 3 children. Ahaziah, who was the king after Ahab, then Jehoram, who was also king after his brother Ahaziah, and also they had a daughter called Athaliah, and Athaliah was actually the queen of the southern kingdom of Judah for a time. But that's a story for another day. Now, for our purposes, we only care about Omri's grandson Jehoram because he's most likely the one referenced in the Mesha Stela. Now, as we said before, the Mesha Stela is from the land of Moab, and it was written by their king, King Mesha. Now, Moab and Israel were constantly fighting with each other, and over the course of their reigns, Omri, Ahab, and Jehoram all had conflicts with Moab. And we know this because this is what the Mesha Stela says. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to read the Mesha Stela for ourselves. And remember, this is King Mesha speaking. It's also important to remember before we start reading that the god of Moab is Chemosh. He's going to come up a lot in this inscription. Okay, let's begin reading the Mesha Stela. Quote, I am Mesha, son of Chemosh, king of Moab, the Dibonite. My father ruled over Moab 30 years, and I ruled after my father. I made this high place for Chemosh in Quahara, high place of salvation, for he saved me from all the kings and made me enjoy the sight of my enemies. Omri, king of Israel, oppressed Moab for a long time because Chemosh was angry with his country. His son succeeded him. Can we stop here for a moment? When it says his son succeeded him, it's probably not just referring to Ahab, but also his grandson Jehoram. All right, let's continue reading. His son succeeded him, and he also declared, I will oppress Moab. In my days he declared thus, but I enjoyed his view and that of his house. Israel was destroyed forever. Omri had taken possession of the land of Madaba, and he dwelt in it during his day, and during half of my days, his sons 40 years, but Chemosh restored it during my days. Chemosh said to me, Go, take Nebo from Israel. I went in the night, and I fought there from dawn until noon. I took it and killed everyone, 7,000 men, boys, women, daughters, and pregnant women, because I devoted it to Ashtar Chemosh. I took from there the Herith altars of Yahweh, and I brought them before Chemosh. The king of Israel had built Yahaz, and he lived there while fighting against me, but Chemosh drove him out before me. End quote. Now that's just a portion of the Mesha Stela, but hopefully just by reading this portion, you can appreciate how significant this archaeological find is. In his commentary on 1st and 2nd Kings, David Lamb writes the following, quote, the discovery of the Mesha Stela is one of the most significant archaeological finds in the region, particularly for biblical studies. It is dated to about 835 BC and contains the earliest certain ancient reference to Yahweh, the God of Israel. He continues to write, it is the longest Iron Age inscription found in the region. While 3 other ancient inscriptions each mention Israel once, the Kirk monolith, the Tel Dan Stela, and the Meneptah Stela, the Mesha inscription refers to Israel by name 5 times and to Omri twice, end quote. So here, this author makes mention of other inscriptions, all of which are before you right now. And just to get a sense of how influential the Omri dynasty was, the Kirk monolith, the Mesha Stela, the Tel Dan Stela, and the Black Obelisk are all connected to Omri and his descendants. That's how important this family was at that time. Now, before we continue to explore the Mesha Stela, if you're enjoying this video so far and you're keen for me to continue making videos like this, where we will explore the artifacts before you now, can I encourage you to hit that like button, leave me a comment, and subscribe. I would love it if we could get 70 likes on this video, and the highlight of my day is always reading your comments, so please share your thoughts below. It also really does help the algorithm as well. My goal is to continue to make videos and to do a deep dive on all of these archaeological artifacts, but in order to do so, I need your help, so please hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. All right, let's get back into the content now. So as we said before, these Israelite kings, King Omri, Ahab, and Jehoram, over the course of their careers, all attacked Moab. But the Bible actually doesn't mention this for Omri and Ahab. So we're going to now focus on Jehoram and his attack on Moab, which is found in 2 Kings 3, and we're going to compare this biblical account with what is written on the Mesha Stela that we've just read before. So remember, according to the Mesha Stela, Israel oppressed Moab for many years. But then, thanks to the help of Moab's god Chemosh, King Mesha actually manages to become dominant over Israel. So let's now compare this to what we read in 2 Kings 3. So in this biblical account, what we're told is that King Jehoram, who is the king of Israel, with the help of 2 other kings, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and the king of Edom, who is not named, go to attack Moab together. So these 3 kings attack Moab. Before they begin their attack, they speak to the prophet Elisha, who tells them they will be successful. Elisha says, quote, "The Lord will hand Moab over to you. You shall conquer every fortified city and every choice city," end quote. And initially, things go very well for these 3 kings. It looks like Elisha's prophecy will come true. But then something truly fascinating happens. Mesha, seeing that he's in real trouble, decides to sacrifice his son, presumably to the god Chemosh, in the hope that this will help with the battle. Now, what makes this biblical account really, really fascinating is the fact that this child sacrifice works. Once Mesha sacrifices his sons, all of the 3 kings retreat from Moab. We read this in 2 Kings chapter 3, verses 26 to 27, quote, "When the king of Moab saw that the battle was going against him, he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him, and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. And a great wrath came upon Israel, so they withdrew from him and returned to their own land," end quote. So what seems to have happened here is that Chemosh accepted the human sacrifice and unleashed his wrath upon Israel, Judah, and Edom. This now leads us to 2 very obvious questions. The first of which is, does child sacrifice work? And the second is, did Elisha's prophecy fail? And what we're now going to do is explore these questions, but this is going to be exclusive to my patrons. My patrons keep this channel going. So if you want to support my work and get tons of exclusive content, please become a patron today. For the remainder of this video, we're going to get very nerdy, delving into a great book called Child Sacrifice in Ancient Israel. And we're also going to be quoting from John Walton to see a Christian defense as to why Elisha's prophecy didn't truly fail. If all of this sounds interesting to you, please make sure you become a patron today. If you're not in a position to become a patron, please make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. Very few people make it this far into any YouTube video. So if you are watching this, you have no excuse. Hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. All right, thank you for watching until the end. And for my patrons, this video will continue. All right, my dear patrons, we're now going to explore these 2 questions. Let's get straight into it. We're going to begin by asking, did Elisha's prophecy fail? Well, let's remind ourselves what Elisha's prophecy actually was. Elisha said, "The Lord will hand Moab over to you. You shall conquer every fortified city and every choice city. Every good tree you shall fell. All springs of water you shall stop up. Every good piece of land you shall ruin with stones." Now, on the face of it, it doesn't truly seem like this was fulfilled because, as we saw, Israel, Judah, and Edom all retreat. They don't truly conquer the land. And what some authors will say is that this prophecy was from Yahweh, but then, thanks to the sacrifice of Mesha, Chemosh actually thwarts this prophecy. Now, that seems pretty blasphemous on the face of it to say that Yahweh was thwarted by a foreign god. Nevertheless, when you read through commentaries and other books, that's what you're going to come across again and again. So let's read some authors now to see what they say. And we're actually going to begin with John Walton, who is a Christian, and he gives us a Christian defense as to why this prophecy seems to have failed, but it didn't actually. So this is a Christian defense. It says, the most likely explanation then is this: God had promised to deliver Moab into their hands, but he had not promised to strike down Moab on their behalf. If Israel fights, then they will win, but they still have to go and fight. He continues. However, when faced with the manifested or impending power of the enemy deity in response to the king's sacrifice, that is, the great fury against Israel, they did not fight, but instead they give in and go home. They withdrew and returned to their own land. He continues. If they had stayed to fight, then they would have won, but it is neither the fault of Yahweh nor the fault of Elisha that they chose not to claim the victory that had been promised. He continues once more, therefore 2 Kings 3:26-27 does not depict Yahweh being thwarted by the power of an enemy deity, and it does not offer biblical proof that there are such things as deities who can successfully oppose the will of Yahweh. However, the passage does depict a deity, presumably Chemosh, accepting a human sacrifice. End quote. So that's the Christian defense, and I think that's a pretty good Christian defense of it. Let's now read from another author. This is from Julie Faith Parker, who says the following, and this is really interesting as well. She says, while the sacrifice is efficacious, it is also confounding. As the Israelites leave Moab, they are denied total victory. This contradicts the sense of Elisha's prophecy in 2 Kings 3, which predicts Israelite conquest. In verse 18, Elisha foretells, and he, Yahweh, will give Moab into your hand or power. Scholars attempt to explain why the Israelites lose the battle after Elisha had predicted they would win, yet scholars' efforts to explain that Elisha's prediction was indeed fulfilled extenuate the conundrum of the Israelite retreat. It is entirely plausible to read 2 Kings 3 and conclude that Elisha was wrong. He predicted total victory for the allied forces over Moab, but in the end, the Israelites withdraw from the battle. The text allows for the possibility that the fighting unfolds in a way that even Elisha did not foresee, defying his prediction. The prophet did not know that the Moabite king would sacrifice his son to his God and bring down divine wrath upon the Israelites. Perhaps Elisha did not realize that Chemosh could be so powerful. Yet the prophet, along with the reader, learns this shocking lesson through the sacrifice of a boy. End quote. So as you can clearly see here, Julie Faith Parker isn't writing from a Christian perspective, but it's still good to see what everyone has to say about this text. I'm going to throw in my own 2 cents here about whether or not Elisha's prophecy was fulfilled or not. The most important thing before we go into it is you should read 2 Kings chapter 3 in full. So please pause this video, go read it in full. All right, now that you're back, let's reread Elisha's prophecy and highlight some important things. It says, the Lord will hand Moab over to you. You shall conquer every fortified city and every choice city. Every good tree you shall fell. All springs of water you shall stop up. Every good piece of land you shall ruin with stones. End quote. All right, having now read Elisha's prophecy, as you continue to read through chapter 3 of 2 Kings, right before Mesha sacrifices his son, we read the following. And again, let's highlight the important portions, and I want you to see how they align with Elisha's prophecy. They say, the cities they overturned, and on every good piece of land everyone threw a stone until it was covered. Every spring of water they stopped up. Every good tree they felled. Only at Ker Hareseth did the stone walls remain until the slingers surrounded and attacked it. End quote. So hopefully you can see here that the destruction brought by Israel and Judah and Edom is clearly outlined here. Everything that Elisha prophesied happened. His prophecy was fulfilled to the letter. Nevertheless, what you can say is that the overall prophecy, the sense of the prophecy, that Israel would totally conquer Moab, well, maybe that didn't exactly happen. But what Elisha prophesied, word for word, all of that happened. So I'm not saying that there isn't any tension here at all. There clearly is. There is this sense that what Elisha said was fulfilled, but it wasn't. He said that they would totally conquer Moab, which they didn't, but still everything he said would happen, happened. So I think it's good to read it with that context. I never want to say that there's no trouble here at all, but I think it's important that we're fair and we read things in its full context. So read 2 Kings chapter 3 for yourself, come to your own conclusions. All right, we now come to the more interesting question, and that is, does child sacrifice work? So let's now delve into this, and let's begin by rereading the relevant portion of 2 Kings 3, which says, when the king of Moab saw that the battle was going against him, he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him, and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. And a great wrath came upon Israel, so they withdrew from him and returned to their own land. Now, we're really going to focus on this sentence, a great wrath came upon Israel. From whom exactly did this wrath come from? Did it come from Chemosh? And that's kind of the common sense interpretation, since Mesha would have sacrificed to his god, which would have been Chemosh, or perhaps it came from Yahweh against his own people. So that's a main question we're going to come against. And we're going to read this author here from the Journal of Inductive Biblical Studies, very impressive. It says, the greatest point of contention among scholars regarding 2 Kings 3:27 has been the subject of the great wrath. The text is silent on this issue, simply noting that the great wrath was present against the Israelites. On one hand, some scholars contend that the wrath emanated from Chemosh, since this was the god to whom Mesha had sacrificed. This was the same deity who was exacting revenge on behalf of his worshippers. We continue to read, quote, on the other hand, some have seen it impossible for the Bible to refer to the wrath of a foreign deity as being efficacious against Israel. Therefore, they have posited that the subject of the wrath is Yahweh. So there's one really big question there. On the face of it, I have to say, it seems like it's coming from Chemosh, just as the plain reading of the text. But to further explore this now, I'm going to refer to this great book, Child Sacrifice in Ancient Israel, and we're going to read a large portion of it. So buckle up, this is a really fascinating read. We read, quote, what precisely is this wrath and how does it serve to counteract Elisha's prophecy? Some take the wrath to be an emotion felt by the Israelites. Upon seeing the human sacrifice, the Israelites either became angry, lost heart, or even had a psychological breakdown. This view assumes that the prophecy only failed because the Israelites failed to grasp the victory that Yahweh had given them. It was their outrage at seeing the gruesome act of human sacrifice that cost them the victory. He continues, this solution is problematic, however, since the natural reaction to wrath is to fight all the harder, not to retreat. Furthermore, the phrase, a great wrath came upon, elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible is exclusively used of divine anger against human beings, which tilts the balance in favor of viewing the wrath here as divine, not human. If then the wrath is something that goes out against Israel rather than something felt by them, it appears that Mesha's sacrifice called down a divine wrath that effectively countered the oracle of the prophet Elisha. It does seem clear that Mesha's sacrifice of his firstborn son was carried out in response to a dire situation in which he needed divine help. Just as importantly, the sacrifice is depicted as efficacious. That is, Mesha's sacrifice of his firstborn son is presented as an effective means of propitiating a deity. There is no indication in the narrative that the sacrifice was illegitimate or even surprising. At the very least, such sacrifices were within the conceptual realm of the communities among whom this tale was circulated. The matter-of-fact way in which the sacrifice is reported, without a word of explanation or elaboration, also indicates that the ancient audience was acquainted with the possibility of sacrificing one's firstborn child in desperate circumstances and found it plausible that child sacrifices would persuade one's God to intervene. It nonetheless remains surprising that the Israelite scribes would compose and preserve a tale that tells of a foreign king counteracting an oracle of Yahweh via a human sacrifice, presumably to the Moabite god Chemosh, despite the fact that the divine recipient is conspicuously unnamed. That the text reports this act without any expression of judgment concerning the act is all the more striking. End quote. I feel that that very long quote really does summarize the issue nicely. So in this Patron exclusive, we have explored these two questions. Does child sacrifice work, and did Elisha's prophecy fail? And I really didn't give you a yes or no on either one of them. But this is what I'm going to encourage you always to do, and that is to never exchange truth for certainty. I love that quote. I don't know who said it, but if you know who, leave it in the comment below. But I feel that's very important. Sometimes you just have to live with ambiguity and you have to live with confusion. And I think in the case of these two questions, unfortunately, we have to. Hopefully you have enjoyed this exploration of these two questions. And can I once again thank you all for being patrons. You keep this channel going. I really cannot stress that enough. Thank you for watching until the end. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.